Folks, there you have it, the speech that Trump delivered Friday evening in Pennsylvania. Trump has doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%, announced in his campaign-style rally after U.S. markets closed on Friday, and set to take effect this June 4th. I apologize. The move hits a $7.6 billion export sector. For Canada specifically, it's almost a $20 billion industry, and the government still hasn't issued a meaningful response. He claimed the hike would secure steel in the United States and made it very clear no one would bypass the new barrier. The announcement came as negotiations with China were collapsing and Trump needed a domestic political win. Canada exports nearly all of its aluminum to the US, over 3 million tons specifically, and this is annually. And roughly 1/4 of all US steel imports into the US come from Canada. These tariffs threaten one of Canada's most valuable manufacturing sector. When tariffs were set at 25%, US prices rose by at least 16%. Canadian suppliers lost clients, automotive production slowed down, and layoffs began. But at 50%, the Canadian Steel Producers Association says the US market effectively shuts down. That's half of Canada's steel exports gone basically overnight. An announcement came after markets closed Friday. So at this point, no financial reaction could have been priced in. But now, this morning, we notably saw companies heavily reliant on steel and aluminum, such as GM and Tesla, experience stock declines of around 1%. This is due to anticipated increases in material costs, and steel and the Dow fell by 200 points. These market movements reflect investor concerns over the potential for increased production costs, supply chain disruptions, and escalating trade tensions resulting from the new tariffs. A U.S. federal appeals court recently reinstated Trump's authority to impose tariffs, reversing a lower court's ruling that had blocked many of his previous trade actions. The current ruling didn't block industry-specific tariffs like steel and aluminum, which Trump is now using as leverage. Australia condemned the hike immediately. Their trade minister called it economic self-harm. Canada issued a short statement from Dominic LeBlanc, and Melanie Joly stated the government had taken note and promised to defend Canadian interests. Industry leaders in Canada are demanding more detailed plans. They're calling for retaliatory tariffs and enforcement measures against steel dumping, especially from China, which undercuts domestic producers, much like in the US. These demands are not new. Similar calls went unanswered after Trump's first wave of tariffs in 2018. Previous efforts to block dumped steel into Canada have been very ineffective. If we lose the US market and keep allowing underpriced imports into our own country, the result is not just lower profits, it's full closures. According to Canadian Steel Producers Association, current dumping practices already distort pricing, and major trade barriers like this one only accelerate losses. Ontario and Quebec are the two provinces most exposed to these tariffs. Ontario produces about 70% of Canada's steel, and Quebec is home to a massive share of aluminum output. Between them, tens of thousands of jobs are directly at risk. From plant workers to suppliers to transportation, the broader ripple effect could impact hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs. When you factor in construction, infrastructure, manufacturing, and secondary industries that depend on steel and aluminum. Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he is in intensive talks with the US to secure a new economic and security agreement. But no terms have been released, no timelines have been confirmed, and no retaliation has been announced. We're facing the collapse of a $7.6 billion industry and a potential huge wave of layoffs, and there's no emergency response plan in place. The United Steelworkers Union has called on the government to expand its use of countermeasures, including Section 53 of the Customs Tariff, to target a broader list of U.S. goods and close loopholes that allow tariff-free American imports. Catherine Gobden of the Canadian Steel Producers Association warns this tariff will disrupt supply chains on both sides of the border. She says Canada's integrated steel market with the US will fracture a move that also hurts American manufacturers who rely on Canadian inputs. This isn't an isolated decision. It's part of a broader trade strategy. If Trump sees no resistance, he could escalate tariffs further to exports such as lumber and agriculture. In 2018, he imposed similar tariffs on Canada using the same national security justification. Canada's response was dollar-for-dollar tariffs targeting politically sensitive US goods. The pressure worked decently, and the tariffs were dropped in 2019. So there's precedent. Retaliation forces negotiation. This time, Ottawa is delaying. No new tariffs, no economic relief, and no procurement shift to support domestic producers. So where does that leave Canada? A looming tariff that feels like it's been in the background for eternity. No real government plan, no export-dependent industry in crisis, and hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs at risk. We need targeted countermeasures. We need procurement strategies that prioritize domestic steel. We need investment in Canadian manufacturing, and we need to stop letting foreign dumping hollow out our market. And we need to build using our own materials. All right, folks, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out tremendously. Have a wonderful day.